Eric, thanks so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking time to unpack the journey of this book that you created that seemed to take on a life of its own.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk a little bit about your life that led to this book. You've got one of the more interesting bios that I've seen in a long time. So, can you tell us a little bit about you before you sat down to write this book?
Yeah, yeah, I have. I've been fortunate to have some very interesting experiences in my life. Um, yeah, for instance, I've lived in Denver, Colorado for 35 years, with the exception of 2 years, and I lived in Rome. Went to University of Colorado. Before that, I actually worked as an industrial welder and decided that I wanted to go to university because one of the things that you notice when you look around a welding shop is you don't see very many old welders. So I thought, let's try university. So I went to University of Colorado and studied Russian language and literature. And that's where I first sort of got bit by the story bug, right? And cut my teeth on all those Russian giants. And it's been a diverse career after that. Worked in finance, worked in IT for a long time. Wrote on and off for the Denver Post. When I lived in Europe, I wrote as a correspondent for a couple of outlets. Got a contract to write a couple of nonfiction books, tour guide books about Italy, which was a lot of fun, and started working on the Reincarnationist Papers around that time, and self-published the book in 2009 with some interesting add-ons that ended up with you and I talking on the on Riverside FM, John.
Well, the idea for this book is of interest to me. Had you long been interested in ideas of reincarnation? Was that a topic that you had investigated, or how? Why reincarnation?
So the reincarnation actually comes from two primary areas and then sort of a tertiary area after that. The first one is I was just struck by the idea, John. We've all said this and heard other people say this. Oh my gosh, if I only knew, what I know when I'm 30 or 40 or 50 or 60 when I was 20 years old, right? What would that be like? And so I took that idea to its extreme, which is, it's a lot of what storytelling is about. And I imagine what would it be like if you had the memories of several lifetimes and you basically had the wisdom and the accumulated experience of a 120-year-old or a 250-year-old in a 20-year-old body. What would those characters be like? What would their existence be like? And I thought, man, that would be super interesting and that would be really fun to write about. And it was fun to write about, and people seemed to like the book and seemed to think that that was interesting. So that's one. The second, it gets a little weird and metaphysical, but I actually have three memories, John, that don't belong to me. They're very short. I call them memory shards, and Ian Shore and I talked about this, who's a screenwriter for Infinite. The longest one is probably about 30 seconds long. The shortest one is probably about 10 seconds long, and they seem to come from a time period from like the 1870s until the 1940s, definitely predating me. But they're as real as any of the memories that I had. And so that was sort of the other catalyst, John, is, what would it be like if you didn't just remember like a snippet or something that wasn't from you, but what if you remembered everything, every experience, every skill, every language, every interaction? What would that be like? And so the marriage of those two things was really the genesis for the Reincarnationist Papers.
That's such interesting ideas to be tackling. You did you attempt to, take these ideas and have them published in the traditional route, or what was the journey like to get these stories to people?
So I did in 2008. I wrapped up the last draft, what I thought at the time was the last draft of the Reincarnationist Papers, since it's been republished with Blackstone Publishing this year. I've actually worked with a traditional publisher and all of the editing experts there, which has been a real eye-opening experience as a self-published author. We can talk about that if you want. But yeah, I took it out and tried to get an agent. I actually had an agent, and we shopped it around, and everybody liked it. But it was just, because it's kind of a genre mashup. It's a bit thriller, it's a bit historical fiction, it's a bit metaphysical fiction, it's a bit urban fantasy. People had a hard time sort of visualizing who the buyer for this book would be. And so what I did is actually did something really, in hindsight, I actually think it's fairly unique. Nobody that I've talked to has ever told me that they've seen anything similar to this. I actually really trusted my readers. And John, one thing, even though publishers were like, they're lukewarm about it, every reader that I ever shared the book with early on loved it. And they're like, man, this is such a great book, such an interesting concept. It's so novel and new. Can I read more? So I really believe that there were readers out there, and I really just needed to find more of them. And so the first thing that I did is I just decided to trust my readers to help me reach a wider audience. And so what I did in this original self-published version of the book here, you can see up at the top, it says promotional edition. So what I did is I put a reward on the first page of this book, and that reward was a reward of the Agents Commission for any reader who would introduce the book to a Hollywood producer or a New York publisher where the story would get picked up into wider release. And it sounds, John, like the zaniest message in a bottle marketing idea, right? Each one of these books is sort of its own little marketing engine, right? Until it works. And it did work. And what I didn't realize was how far it would have to go in order to work. But it actually, that's sort of an amazing story.
Well, we'll definitely get to that story. Let's talk a little bit about self-publishing, because many writers disregard that idea completely. Other writers embraced that completely and would actually never take their material to someone else that was going to, take the majority of the profits. Talk a little bit, if you would, about your journey with self-publishing and how you see that world.
Yeah, this is a complex topic that's sort of evolving for me. But yeah, I'm a huge fan of self-publishing because, I'm a fan of traditional publishing as well, and I would encourage anybody to try the traditional publishing route, but it's hard, and there's a ton of rejection, and even the James Pattersons and the J.K. Rowlings have rejection letters in their desk drawers, right, from where people didn't quite understand the vision of two of the most successful authors, over the last 30 years. But if you get rejected, that doesn't mean that you necessarily should stop or be turned away. The way that self-publishing works today with outlets like Amazon KDP, Drafted Digital, I actually go back to Lightning Source, which was a sort of print-on-demand that was picked up by Ingram Spark and Ingram Distribution. There's nothing that prevents a writer from getting their work in front of an audience. There's nothing that prevents that today. But if you think back to the 90s, to the 80s, to the 1970s, if you didn't get a publishing deal, you were pretty much shut out. But that has completely changed now. And the real magic happens when readers and writers interact. Right? That's where the magic happens. And, mine is would probably be categorized as a self-publishing success story that we can talk about in a second. But I'm not the only one. Andy Weir, who had a book come out last month as well, and is famous for The Martian. People forget that this is a guy who published The Martian serially on his website, and did it self-published until it got enough readers that he gained the attention of traditional publishing, got a publishing deal, and off he goes. Same with E.L. James, right, with 50 Shades of Grey, right? That was, she self-published and was doing fan fiction and her own versions of those things as I've read the story. And now, geez, she's a giant, right? She's absolutely crushing it. So there's nothing that prevents the self-published author from being able to get their stuff in front of readers today, which is a huge breakthrough in my opinion.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the journey of this book from self-publishing to Paramount Pictures. How does that happen?
So it happens with the reward, right? And then trusting your readers. And it sounds like a crazy idea, but you put a promotional edition out there, and then I was getting one or two emails every 90 days. Oh, I know someone who's friends with the Pilates instructor of some director at Sony Pictures, right? Or my brother's cousin's wife babysits for a stuntman at Warner Brothers. And they would try to, these little circuitous routes to try to build connections to get the book in front of, an entertainment professional. And there were probably, seriously, not that many books out there, John, probably less than 1,000 books in circulation. And one of them somehow ended up in a hostel in Nepal. And it was found by a gentleman named Rafi Crone. And if you look at the credits of Infinite, he's actually the executive producer. He was at that time working as an assistant to a Hollywood director. I'm not going to drop the name here, but we would all know this person's work and have watched many wonderful movies from that director. And Rafi and this director have been working together for years. Rafi actually found the Reincarnationist Papers, found a copy of this book in a hostel in Nepal, and picked it up. The way people travel in hostels, right? They carry a book, they read a book, they don't want to carry a book forever, they drop it off, they pick another one up off the shelf. Well, this one was left there. And he read it and loved the book and saw the reward, and he emailed me on Thanksgiving Day 2010. And he said, man, I just read this book. Eric, this book is amazing. Tell me, is this reward still available? Because I can totally see this as a movie. And so we talked on the phone, and with a scratchy telephone call from Nepal. And, he said, dude, I'm going to get this made into a movie. He's like, I don't care what it takes. I'm going to get it done. And Rafi, man, he just never quit. He started work on this, and it went to Imagine, it went to Warner, I think, it went to Crackle for a while, and then eventually landed with John Zalzerny and Bellevue Productions. And John Zalzerny was the first Hollywood, actually, not just the first Hollywood guy, the first entertainment professional to actually give me money for an option on the Reincarnationist Papers. And I couldn't believe my luck, right? And then, especially when the check cleared, I was like, holy cow, I guess this is legit, right? This is a legit opportunity. And then, John Zalzerny brought on Ian Shore, and they worked on it for a couple of years. And then John Zalzerny was just masterful in the way that he managed this. He took it out and, took it out to like the big 5 studios on a Monday, and then Paramount came back right after lunch and said, no, we want it in a preemptive bid. We don't want anybody else to be able to buy it. And that's how it got started.
One of the most difficult things that writers face is turning their work over to someone else. And this world they've created, these characters that they've created, in watching someone else take and give life to that work in a different way, through a different lens. Can you talk about the process of this great, wonderful, one in a million, success that happens but then having to turn your work over to people that will inevitably do other things with this world, these characters. Even this great name you have for this book eventually becomes something else. So, can you talk about that process?
Yes, I can. It's an interesting process. It's not always a comfortable one, and it's a Faustian bargain in some ways from an artistic point of view, but in my mind, a good one. And keep in mind, let's rewind the clock back to 2009. I had reached out to my readers to try to get the book to a wider audience. So the goal was always to try to reach as wide an audience as possible for the book. And when John reached out to me, and when Rafi and I were, Rafi and I worked on a treatment together. We worked on a couple of beat sheet formulas together. And, I saw the movie version, the movie adaptation going in a different direction. And I sort of landed back on some advice that Stephen King gives people, which is movies are very different art forms than novels. Novels are like, you get to spend 12 to 25 hours interacting with the reader. You can take your time. There's a lot more internal dialogue. There's a lot, that you can play around with different points of view. Movie, got to get it all done and wrapped up in 2 hours, right? There has to be sort of a fleetness and efficiency about the storytelling. And there are things that movies have to do that novels don't have to do. And you just have to appreciate that they're different art forms. And when Ian Shore and Todd Stein started working on screen stories for that, it went in some directions that I was like, well, that's not completely comfortable for me. And I didn't, but I sat on those. I didn't talk about that because, John, I was terrified that any artistic input that I might say, oh, it's got to have this, or they've got to make this decision, or they've got to land on this square, would end up, just diverting the course of this script, 1 or 2 degrees from its true north, and then it ends up in a deal that doesn't get done. And Rafi and John kept warning me from the beginning, hey, congratulations on getting an option. There's only about 1% of these that ever get to production. And then when it got sold to Paramount, John said, hey, congratulations, but it's only about 5% of these that get sold to a studio that ever see principal shooting. And then even then, like weeks before it was due to start shooting, Chris Evans dropped out of the lead role, and everybody thought, well, that's it. It's been a good run, right? So, I just didn't dare breathe on this thing, John, for fear that it would go in a different direction, and that that Ian, Todd, and John and Rafi knew what the story should be, what it would need to be in order to be a commercial Hollywood vehicle. And it turns out they were right.
Well, you've done it. This story has made it all the way. It's streaming on Paramount Plus, and people all over the world are getting to enjoy this story. What have you learned along the way? What have you taken away from this process and this experience?
So I've learned a couple of really valuable lessons. Number one, my initial desire to see this book and this story reach a wider audience. Now it has 2 versions. It has an Infinite version, but it still has the Reincarnationist Papers version. That's happening. I'm number 1 bestseller in my category on Amazon right now. And none of that happens without Rafi Crone, John Zalzirni, Todd Stein, and Ian Shore. It just doesn't happen. As well as all the other folks, Lorenzo de Buenaventura, Antoine Fuqua, Mark Wahlberg, everybody that worked on Infinite. That doesn't happen without that. And the punchline on this, John, is that it all goes back to the lesson that I embraced at the beginning, which is to trust readers with the story, And that is really the moral of the story there is one of collaboration. The life of a novelist and the work ethic of a novelist is a very solitary endeavor. You engage the blank page on your own. It's not a committee. It's not a writing group, right? It's yours and the blank page. But in order for it to get into a commercial product that is going to reach a wider audience, there has to be collaboration there. Even if you're just collaborating with an editor, with someone who's helping you self-publish the book, or if you're collaborating with other people who are taking the story into a screen version, you have to open up and collaborate and trust others with that vision. And that's part of the payoff in the Faustian bargain there.
Wow. There are so many writers who dream of being where you are, getting to have the experiences that you've had, seeing their work put on the screen, performed by incredible world talent actors. What advice or what would you say to writers who are not at that point yet, who are trying to gain wisdom from your experience?
Yeah. My advice is engage with readers and trust readers. You're going to talk to, eventually, if you get far enough in this where you actually have a finished product, you're going to talk to a couple of agents, because you're going to be incredibly lucky if the first agent that you engage with says, "Oh, John, your stuff's amazing. It's gold. Let's here's the agreement. It's coming in the mail," right? You're going to end up talking to a lot of agents. You're going to end up talking to a lot of editors, a lot of publishers, and you're going to get a lot of no's. You keep in mind, you only need one yes, right? I only needed one yes, and my yes was Rafi Krohn. And once Rafi found the book and brokered the deal to John Zalzerny, and then we got on to Paramount, traditional publisher found me, a different agent found me, right? Trust those readers. The readers are actually the most important people in publishing. More important than editors and publishers, more important than agents, it's readers. Engage with readers. There's nothing standing between you and your readers, and self-publishing can be a direct way to do that if the other traditional publishing doors are closed to you. And then listen to what they say. If they love it, if they love this part but not that part, listen. These guys are your audience. This should be the star that you steer to, is satisfying that audience of readers. And your readers are out there waiting for you as a writer. Go find them.
Eric, thanks so much for taking time to talk to us today, and congratulations on your incredible success.
Thanks, John. I appreciate it. And go watch Infinite on Paramount Plus, and go pick up a copy of the Reincarnationist Papers. Thanks, John. It's been my pleasure.